Oh, I was on mute. Good start. But hi everybody. I'm gonna give it some time for people to start trickling in before I get started. But I am so excited and pumped to give this masterclass today. So let's just see. I know we have a decent number of people who had opted to join. And so let's give some time for them to trickle in here. But we are now live. I'm really, really excited to give this masterclass. Um, this masterclass is going to be on data-driven inclusion, combining inclusive practice and decision-making excellence. And I'm going to give it just another minute or so as people come in. I know for many of you, maybe it's your lunch hour, maybe you're having breakfast, um, maybe you're just hanging out. But I'm excited that you are going to be joining me here in just a few moments. All right. Give it a moment. Okay, so wherever you are viewing from, if you have comments you want to share, things you want to say, please feel free to use the comment box for this. I'm really pumped and excited to be doing this with all of you today. Okay. All right. Sorry, I was playing it on the other end. So, data-driven inclusion, combining inclusive practice and decision-making excellence. This is a masterclass. I'm going to put myself here for a second, but this is a masterclass I've pulled together. I've heard a lot of um, really great insight from other people who had mentioned, I really don't know where to begin when I want to go and put on or pull together my DEI strategy. I know that we might need training. Maybe we need to have more people um, involved in initiatives. We want to start a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. There's varying amounts of information that anybody may want to pull together to build a strategy for a more inclusive culture. And it can be challenging. It can be really challenging to know, well, where do I begin? Am I focusing on the right priorities? And maybe I'm brand new to this entire thing and I really don't know where to begin. I don't know where do I even start in building a DEI strategy because this is something that is incredibly new to me. So, how do you make those decisions in the right way so that you can start to foster um, a more inclusive practice? So, I'm going to go through information on this, and we will get started here. If you're with me, put that you're with me in the comments or in the chat, and there will be time for Q&A at the end of this as well. All right, so let's get started here. Okay, so really what I'm going to go through for this masterclass, I want to just give a little bit more information on who I am. And I'm Geronda Wallach Spiller. I use she, her pronouns. I am the CEO and founder of Courageously Inclusive Leadership, LLC. And I'm an award winning speaker and international best-selling author. I was part of a compilation book with 9 other fantastic women for a book that we pulled together called Her Badass Story: How We've Overcome Trauma and Tactics and Actionable Takeaways that you can leverage to bring back your full self. I also have a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology. I am certified in cultural intelligence and the global standard, which is going to be the crux of this masterclass today, where I help to do a full scale assessment of your systems, policies, processes across your organization to help you focus on the right priorities and make a data driven approach to inclusion. And my background is in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI and HR. And really, what I am super passionate about around this series is really empowering corporate leadership teams, or my company, I should say, is empowering corporate leadership teams to then create inclusive and safe environments for their employees, regardless of their gender, their race, or any other identities that they have. And I do live in Maine with my partner and my four fur babies. So I have three cats and a dog. And I am in my office right now with the door closed so that I don't get any disturbances. They love to work with me. So maybe I'll make a feature in another masterclass. So, what we're going to be covering today is it's really helpful to have an understanding of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means so that you can effectively review your processes in the right way. And common language around the organization is very important. So, we'll do a quick dive into that. We'll also go through the concept of what it looks like to map out what you currently have against the standard. So, looking at what initiatives you have, equity measures, things of that nature. So, the power of mapping, how you could do it, why it's important, assessing your organization. So, we're going to learn about a framework for conducting DEI audits and helping to prioritize your areas of focus. And then we'll go into inclusive practices for documenting and implementation. It's one thing to assess to document, but how do you then take that and put it into action and overcome some of that resistance and change, and then different ways that you can implement this really helpful information. So really the expectation today, now I will have the chat available. So if you have questions, there is going to be a feature where it'll be anonymous. You can ask questions, but the expectation for today is to make mistakes to grow and learn. I'm going to make this as interactive as I possibly can for you, but no one needs to be an expert in this space. So this is why I say it's more of a brave space. Release any judgment of lack of knowledge that you might have or fear that you might use the wrong words in your comments or your questions. And some conversations they might actually bring up maybe some unknown feelings or uncomfortable feelings. That's okay because what's most important is you sit in and reflect on whatever that discomfort is. And in this space, as I mentioned, you can ask questions without fear because it's anonymous questions. If you don't want to be anonymous, totally cool as well. But that's where you're going to put it into the chat in something called Slido. Now, this is the link. You can scan this QR code with your phone, or you can go to slido.com and put in this code here, which is hashtag 9693878. And this is going to be the interactive portion that we are going to have today. And so with that, we'll do a little bit of practice. And the first question that we have, which is I think is a little bit cut off by my logo here, but it's what do you hope to learn from this masterclass today? I want to try to tailor any courses or trainings or masterclasses that I give. So I like to ask this question to see what do you hope to learn from a masterclass like this? And that'll give me some insight into some things that people would want to learn and leverage. So one thing could be inclusion, how to map out processes. There's a lot of different pieces here. When to document the right processes. Okay, awesome. I see some people are trickling in. Welcome, welcome. If you are just joining, what we're doing is you're using your phone to scan this QR code and share more about what you are looking to learn in this masterclass. All right. So what do you hope to learn? Okay. Awesome. Oops, wrong screen here. Give me a second. There we go. Okay, so it's important to recognize that Some companies have actually laid off their DEI staff and leaders of diverse employee resource groups. They've downsized their training programs or learning and development programs, and they have cut budgets for external DEI groups by as much as 90% in 2023. And this is from CNBC. This number is continuously increasing as we reach 2024. A lot of my DEI practitioners or counterparts are working internally in organizations, and their departments are being dissolved. Their budgeting is being completely wiped out or significantly reduced. And companies are shifting how they want to focus on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some companies that, when they want to go work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, they look a lot of times across at, well, where is our organization and where does it make sense to put more resourcing? But to take all of this away is such a detriment to an organization. It is really, really, really a detriment. And so that's why I think it's important to acknowledge this. And this masterclass will help to reshape how DEI can be. Also, 62% of organizations actually devote little to no resources towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. And most organizations do say that DEI is important, but they fail to invest in those meaningful amounts of money, energy, and time into the right policies and programs to make a more inclusive, welcoming, and supportive workplace. So when you have little to no resourcing, again, you're taking the budgeting away, your retention is being impacted, your finances are also being impacted, and really there's a huge detriment to your organization. It's not even just moral based, it's really your organization will be impacted significantly just by not focusing or adding enough resourcing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I always recommend, if even if you don't know where to start, um, it's really also important that you just recognize that this is really something that is happening. Yeah, and Andrew, I see that you're saying seeing DEI initiative reductions has been your experience as well. It is really disappointing. And I think it might be a lack of knowledge, a lack of awareness of why DEI is so beneficial for organizations. So if you're tuning in with me right now, I'd love to know, how would you rate your organization's current DEI strategy implementation? So how would you rate that? Again, you can scan the QR code and that is going to bring you to the question. And maybe you don't have a strategy in place right now. You may be in the early stages of developing a DEI strategy. Maybe you have a strategy and it's not fully implemented just yet, uh, or it's fully implemented, needs improvement. So wherever you are, it's really helpful for me to know. So it's looking like, I'll share this tab as well. It's looking like you may not have a strategy in place, which is totally okay. It's helpful also to be aware of, do I have something in place? Do I not have something in place? Where do we want to begin with this? Um, so helpful to know that there's not a strategy in place right now, and that is totally okay. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, it's really important to understand the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but understand their true meaning. So, when we think about diversity, we are involving all the ways that people are different. So, this is various characteristics like race, gender, sexual orientation. Equity is, it's not the same as equality. So, this, I can go into this whole topic, but for the purposes of this masterclass, we'll focus on this. But equity is, it's not the same as equality. It really tries to correct any type of imbalance by creating more opportunities for people that have been historically marginalized or have had less access. So you're meeting people where they are to provide the resources they need to be successful. And inclusion is actively inviting every person and group to contribute and participate. And they are valued too, and you're embracing their differences. So when you're looking at building out your strategy, you want to think about, in the makeup of your organization, what what is the diverse groups that we want to um, give more resourcing to? How are we providing more equitable experiences? And are we including people of different backgrounds and identities into a lot of these different initiatives and conversations? So, this is a diversity wheel, I like to call it. And really, the diversity wheel is when you look at the things that are in the middle here, these are the identities that you essentially are born with. And these are things that you typically can't change. Now, you may argue that sexual orientation or identity, those can ebb and flow. And yes, but typically, or your gender might change. But these are the ones that are most common that people say are not as, not the ones that are going to change as significantly. So these most common ones, many people have seen in their workplace. Age or gender and race are usually very, very popular when you start to look at data for DEI. So race and gender are probably your two bigger ones, and then age and other identities as well. On the outside, though, these are ones that come that other or every employee comes with as well, and might fall into these different categories. So for me, we'll use me as an example. um, I am a cisgendered woman. So I was a woman who was born, I was born female at birth, and I am female today, and I accept that gender identity. And I'm also lesbian, but I also am married. That's my marital status. Um, my socioeconomic status might be lower middle class. My parental status, I'm not a parent. So these are different things that come with a group of people, or who you're looking at in terms of the makeup of your organization. So, how are you looking at your policies, your systems in ways that are going to support more than just these commonalities that you see, and or more than just these common um, identities that many of us are more comfortable and aware of? And DEI is even more important than ever today. I'm going to keep using the term DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know there's different ways people use it, but when you think about the bills and the regulations, especially in the United States, there's so much that is being proposed as anti DEI or reducing the efforts and for disenfranchised populations, especially the transgender community, including um, even just including them in the normal economy. There's also the violation of the First Amendment by directing what employers can and cannot require based on content of training. This is happening a lot across universities, colleges. This is happening, and it's really something that some organizations are getting nervous about, because they might think, well, they're not now. There's going to be stipulations for DEI. Why don't we change a lot of things? For corporate discrimination, those cases are increasing astronomically. And generations and identity is something that is being recognized or not recognized enough. So DEI is more important today because of all of these things that are happening across the country. And we've seen really good success cases with organizations who leverage DEI, and it brings more innovation, cost savings, and benefits across any organization. So it's important that we recognize that. Also, when you look across at ethno-racial diversity and the evolution that it's had in the largest cities in each state, this just continues to increase over time. Our cities and and our states and our country is becoming much more diversified, which means we have more opportunity to do what we need to do to be able to provide those inclusive cultures, to expand our recruiting pool. Things are just changing. Our our whole country is becoming much more diverse. Applicant and candidate pools are becoming diverse, even in terms of generational differences. So we have to be on top of how we can support people that are historically marginalized, people from different identities, and provide even just more benefits to organizations, um, from making sure that they belong and that they are taken care of. So now we're going to get into the meaty part of the conversation today. Um, and we're going to talk about the power of mapping. So this is where we're going to get a little bit more into the topic. So when you think about the concept of actually mapping, when you're mapping diverse initiatives or diversity initiatives or equity measures and inclusive practices, you're really creating a more visual representation of the strategies you put in place, the policies you have, the actions that the organization can actually undergo to promote DEI in its structure. So we look at this by what are our diversity initiatives that we have available right now? We have maybe you have employee resource groups, maybe you have mentorship programs, maybe you do some trainings. What are things that we do in terms of equity? Pay at equity audits might be one of them. Equity promotions, accommodations for employees, or inclusive practices. Are we fostering open communication? Are we doing unconscious bias? Are we doing inclusive leadership? So you're mapping out every piece of DEI that you have, whether it's a policy, whether it's a training, and all these different measures. Now, mapping diversity initiatives and equity measures and inclusive practices, they can actually go wrong if they are not approached very thoughtfully. And so, superficial mapping fails to address things like the underlying issues that are making meaningful change. So, if you're just kind of putting out, oh, yeah, we do equity audits. Well, how do you do equity audits? Are you doing equity audits focusing on the right group of people? And what are you taking, how are you taking action to change or improve how you pay people? So it's not just, and there's really more of an underlying issue. Is there bias and reasons why people are not paid equitably? It's also lack of stakeholder involvement. So if you're mapping, your mapping may not actually reflect the perspective and experiences of those it aims to benefit. So your mapping may not actually reflect the experiences of people from more diverse backgrounds or people who fall under those different categories from that diversity wheel that I showed. Do you know the true makeup of your organization to be able to map out and see how effectively are you supporting them? And ignoring the intersectionality, which kind of goes into what I just mentioned before, are you failing to consider how different aspects of an identity overlap and intersect? Because you can miss nuances with that. So, like I mentioned before, I'm a Black woman who's lesbian. My experience is going to be very different, and my needs are going to be very different from a Black woman that is straight. So looking at the different intersecting identities and really figuring out how can we support people where they are, you do not want to ignore intersectionality in your strategy. And also failing to address systemic issues. So addressing systemic issues like bias in your policies or practices, bias in terms of leadership and your promotion practices. Where does bias actually come up and affect your systems to be able to provide those um, those equitable opportunities for people of different identities to be successful? Where does that fall into play? And it's really important that you acknowledge that. And it's important that you acknowledge it, but also recognize it as something that we all have bias, we all have to address it. But if we just do a bias training, for example, we're missing out on really the root underlying issues of how this happens. So these are some ways that we can fail to do uh, the mapping correctly. Now, what does it look like and what does it mean if we're going to be assessing our organization? So this is where the framework for a DEI audit comes in. It's called the ISO 30415 2021 standard. Now, another way, another name for it is the Diversity and Inclusion Service Management. And essentially what this is it's a standard that is global, that was created by amazing thought leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many different DEI practitioners came together and said, organizations typically don't know where to begin in building an effective strategy or knowing how to effectively audit every piece of their organization. So, what this standard does is it develops an inclusive workplace where really it's requiring a commitment, an ongoing commitment to address any inequities or equalities across your organizational systems, your policies, your practices, your processes. and any conscious or unconscious behaviors. So you're essentially conducting a self assessment and evaluation on your entire organization processes. And what this framework does is it's like a checklist to assess your organization based on where your organization is today. So, where are you now, and how can you optimize the performance so that you can mitigate any possible risks that can happen to your organization? So, step one is you're assessing the current state. That's why I'm saying your policies, your processes, and you're going departmentally. So, you're starting with like your organizational leadership, your HR department. Then you're having evidence of achievements of the action that you've even taken so far. Because we don't want to just focus primarily on everything you have to do differently or opportunities that you might have. You want to focus on the achievements and what's worked well so far. Then you can identify those opportunities and those risks that are related to DEI and using this framework. So now that you have kind of an understanding more in this framework and how you assess this is where you start to document what you're seeing. So what should actually be documented? This is where this amazing standard comes in. These are all the sections that you're going to document how equitable or and where you are in terms of how mature DEI is in every segment of your business. So you start with things like starting first, for example, with organizational governance. And organizational governance is your leadership. So then you go into organizational leadership and organization delegated responsibilities. Who's typically responsible for DEI? What does the individual responsibilities look like? Inclusive culture, your whole HR life cycle, products and services. And you're going through all of these different parts of the business, and you're documenting based on a predetermined set of questions where you fall in terms of how mature you are with DEI. So I keep saying how mature you are with DEI, and what this basically means is this is a maturity model, and it guides how you improve the processes and knowing where to prioritize the right approach and where do you want to start in terms of making those improvements. So many organizations, let's say you're at a level one, you may have processes in place, but they're super unpredictable or they're not controlled very well. Level two is that you have this process. It's pretty managed. You have projects that are for this, but maybe they're very reactive. There's not a proactive thought process to them. Or you can be more defined in terms of a particular process. For example, maybe you have a recruiting process that is defined. You have it characterized. You have proactive ways to look for diverse candidates, to look for bias in that process, and so you look at these different levels of maturity and you see based on each section, where does the level of maturity fall? Is organizational governance a one? Is our leadership, do we have a process to hold them accountable? If we don't, it's very unpredictable. Maybe that's where we start, just as an example. And then you're going to assess your current state and accountability and responsibility, for example, like I mentioned with leadership. Your goal is to assess how accountable and responsible leadership is for their commitments towards DEI and their behaviors towards DEI. Are they showing role modeling behavior? For example, things like that. And I'll show you some examples of questions that will be essentially asked as part of this assessment so that you can have a better idea of where you need to focus. So here's what it's going to look like when you're assessing the current state. Now, I haven't written out every question or example, but this is where your focus areas will be in terms of how you're going to start to audit these processes, these systems, what's coming up for your organization. And so, for example, organizational governance, there's going to be questions about how accountable they are, the role modeling behavior that they show, and how they hold others accountable as well. Are they advocating and providing the right resources for diverse employees or employee resource groups, your diversity and equity and inclusion councils? When you think of org leadership, are they establishing those goals and objectives for DEI? How are they contributing towards a positive work culture? Are they directing the system's policies and procedure? And what data are they using and leveraging to make effective decisions to build that more inclusive workplace? Your delegated roles and responsibilities. Are they integrating this role modeling behavior into all the systems and holding their counterparts accountable to do this in their teams and their departments as well? And are there open channels of communication for people to be able to come and say, hey, I don't feel like this is working well, or this is what's working, and I really think that we have an opportunity to do this differently? Are they leveraging what they have available to them in the organization? And if they don't have what they need to have that open channel of communication, are they building what is needed to be able to do so? And then you have individual responsibilities like your teams and your colleagues. What behaviors are they showing? Are you challenging the status quo? Are you speaking up against, anti-racism or behaviors that are not being supportive in an inclusive culture across the board? And when you're assessing the current state of your HR life cycle, HR life cycle is a pretty big part of this assessment. And so you're looking at things like your workforce planning. What does it look like in terms of your workforce composition, where you have a pipeline of people that can move into leadership roles? Do you have underrepresented people in that pipeline? And how at risk are you in terms of DEI? Maybe you are looking to promote people and you don't know how what the makeup of promotions looks like over time. That could be a risk for your organization. Benefits, for example, and this could be non-monetary benefits. This can also be monetary or fixed benefits like performance, paid leave, retirement benefits, healthcare. You're looking to see how equitable you are in terms of providing these across your organization. Even recruitment. Do you have diverse and accessible recruitment channels? Are you screening and assessing and selecting based on experience, or is there going to be bias in the process? And are you aware of the bias that you have in the process too? Also, you're identifying individual requirements that are regarding work environments. So you're giving information about resources like for onboarding, um, helpline numbers, employee resource groups, which are employee led and people of common identities come together so that they can have community, but also share what's needed from their perspective to have a more inclusive and belonging experience and feel successful. So are you reaching out to them? Are people aware that they are available? And how do you resolve DEI related issues and even people complaints that come in? And with training and development or learning and development, like many companies say, do you have formal and informal approaches to this, like online trainings or individual trainings that you can do on your own time or even on the job? Do you provide mentorship programs or coaching, things of that nature? And again, continuing on with the HR life cycle, performance management, looking at inclusive behaviors in terms of how is feedback given, how are you recognizing and rewarding inclusive behaviors? And when you look at succession planning as well, it's again developing those positions for people to have that career advancement in. And what does your diverse pool look like in terms of filling in those leadership roles and critical positions? If people in terms of workforce mobility, those policies involved in transferring individuals from one location to another. If you're a global company, are you looking at how equitable your process might be for moving somebody from one country to another or one city to another? And how equitable is that, especially if you have expats that go and work for a while or even temporary assignments? And lastly, for termination, how transparent are you in terms of the sensitivity that you have and the confidentiality and well-being and health you provide when someone is terminated? This section in particular, layoffs have been significant. Layoffs have been really significant as well for people of color and especially women. So when you're looking at who is getting laid off or who is getting terminated, the reasons why they are getting terminated, what is that picture or what is that story telling you? And how do you improve upon that? You also assess. Now these are examples of the assessment and how they are actually going to be leveraged in terms of the questions that you might be asking. So when we look at products and services, when are you aligning DEI by using inclusive language and imagery for external partners that you're working with? And do you understand the requirements or the needs of the market? I've used this a lot with healthcare organizations, and we talk about patient care, for example, and we talk about clinical trials. And how are you ensuring that you know the demographics or makeups of those who are part of your clinical trials? And when you're planning to actually put forward your clinical trials, are you thinking about it in a way where we want to ensure we have diverse representation in those clinical trials? Because if we're putting out a new drug, for example, um, how is it going to affect people of color differently than people who are not of color, or how will it affect women versus transgender or men? So planning that as well and seeing where you are really helps you to build a better strategy, get more people in the marketplace, build a better success for you and your partners. And in terms of, some people think, um, for imagery and diverse backgrounds and inclusive language, we'll just we'll just use this, and we'll just use stock photos. Stock photos is the way that we want to go. That's just what we're gonna do. Stock photos are helpful-ish in a way, but what I typically recommend in terms of imagery, you really want to think about your organization and what imagery looks like. That will show you a lot. If you want to have pictures from retreats, if you want to have pictures of your team, if you want to have pictures of events, and you're noticing there's not a lot of diversity in terms of your employee base, that also tells a picture. And so you want to be as transparent as you can be with this as well. Your procurement and supply chain. Now, broadening your suppliers, there's supplier diversity out there. Sharing your commitment and DEI values to suppliers. Simplifying the procurement process as well, thinking about how you can bring DEI and the values you have to help you select the right suppliers over time. And your external partners, this is very important. You Now, a lot of companies will say, we really want to do things right internally, want to get our house in order, want to do all this effectively first. We want to do that. That's fine. That's really great. But as part of the auditing process, if you are partnering with organizations externally, you also want to identify what their needs and expectations are. You want to share what your expectations are by partnering with them externally. And you also want to engage them in different initiatives and expand that community relationship. This way, those partnerships will be more long term over time than just a short kind of transactional relationship. Now we went through all these different ways, what the assessment will cover, how you actually document where you are in terms of your processes. Now, what do you do with all of this information? How do you actually implement your findings, and what do you take with all this information? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the implementation process, how it's going to be helpful, and how it's going to be important as we are looking to focus on these different areas over time. And I'm looking this way just because I see if there might be another question that's come through. Okay, cool. So with implementation, we went through that maturity model that I showed, which is, where is each of your processes, or where are each of your processes in terms of a 1 through 5 scale. One being, we're very new in this, it's kind of unpredictable, we're trying, but we don't know where to go. So looking at all those different sections, we want to look at how mature you are in those different areas of your business. And we want to typically, if you're a 1 or a 2, those will help to show you we need to focus on these different areas. So, for example, if we'll I know I'm picking on HR, but background's in HR as well, so I'm going to use that. Uh, in HR, if we are looking at succession planning, and let's say we don't have a process in place to see who we want to have in leadership, and we don't have a process at all to know how people are being promoted, we're at a level 1. It's not to say we're bad at it. It's not to say that we're doing a terrible thing. It's just to say that might be a good area to focus on. That might be a priority as part of your strategy that you want to start focusing on. Even if you feel like you have a process in place for some projects in place, you don't want it to be reactive. So if it's a level 1 or a level 2 and it's kind of managed in a way but it's not really working, again, you want this to be your priority areas, and that's where how it's going to help you to determine at what in what way we want to prioritize your initiatives and build that strategy off of that. So once you have this you're defining where your priorities are, your levels of maturity in terms of each part of your organization that you've now done a full assessment on, you want to decide, well, where do we go from here? Do we need more data. I always say that wrong. Do we need more data? So are we representing things like, do we need more demographic data? We don't have enough to show what succession planning looks like. What does market data look like? What is sentiment analysis, which is sentiments of your brand, and how do people absorb that in, especially people who are underrepresented or people of color or marginalized? Do we need a training? So we'll go again to succession planning and getting people into leadership roles. Maybe we don't have representation or demographics to know, but at the same time, do we need more training on what that looks like? And in terms of even educating your external and internal stakeholders. So do you need more bias training? Do you need more cultural training? Do you need a continued education? What does that look like? Do you need more internal infrastructure? So that's like the formal informal development of um, execution around accountability or deploying other DEI projects or designing internal policies. So, do you need a DEI council or a business resource group or employee resource groups to get more information from your employee base so that you can make more effective decisions? Or do you focus externally and have like a development of external organizations and you have subject matter expertise to help with communicating the org culture? So, things like chambers of commerce or marketing campaigns or gifting and philanthropy, working more with those external partners than you have been. So how I'm saying this is when you go back to this maturity level and all the different parts of your organization that you want to measure, you then decide, is it data that we need? Is it training that we need for this particular section? Is it that we need to build a better internal infrastructure to address this section and priority? Or do we have to focus a little bit more externally to do this really well? Now, you've done your audit, you know where you prioritize. What's really amazing about this assessment that I'm sharing with you today, I am certified in this assessment and it makes it um, streamlined, and I serve as like the project manager and consultant. So there is this beautiful software where you take this assessment on this app and you say, we're a level 1 in this area, we're a level 2 in this area, we're level 3 in this area, we're level 2 in this area, and it will generate the top 5 areas of risk, which is essentially saying this is your DEI strategy. And it'll remind you based on this maturity level, it'll actually assess you based on what your industry is and the size of your organization. It'll tell you that um, this is where you are in terms of the market, in terms of what good looks like in the market for your industry. And that also then helps to say, okay, well, you maybe are a 1 in this area and the market is at a 3. Here's how we can get you to a 3. The reason why this approach is so significant is because a lot of companies might think DEI is a one size fits all approach, and it is not. You might be a 300 employee organization and you might see that Nike is doing something amazing and you try to implement that just like Nike and it's not going to work. Or you may look at your competitors and see what they're doing and say, "Oh, well, we're going to do that." But your competitors' internal infrastructure and the organization is very different from your organization. So this gives you a very tailored approach to the type of work that you would be looking at based on where your organization is, no matter the size of the organization. So having that tailored approach is really helpful. And it shows you at what level of risk would you be at if you did not take action on these types of things, especially what level of risk your particular part of the department will be in. So again, when we are making any of these changes, you want to keep in mind the varying identities or the intersecting identities as you approach implementing these things. So even if you want to pull more demographic data, maybe you want to do a survey where you're looking at, well, what is our full demographic makeup of our organization? So you might want to ask the questions of, what is your race, your gender, your sexual orientation? Of course, it's optional, but you can even ask questions that maybe will expand that out to say, what is also your parental status? Where are you located? Um, what is your religious belief? Things that you can collect to make that intersection or intersectional approach. Now, I gave a lot of information, and I think this is really helpful to give a success story of how I saved an organization over $600,000 by implementing this, and they did the right things. This was a tech company that was about a little over 350 employees. It was a global company, so they had employees in, I want to say it was three other countries. And what was really helpful in terms of this assessment was they didn't have anything in place. They thought they were doing kind of some of the right things. They said, well, we started off as training. Training is where we started. We're just going to train our organization and have and hope that we can help stop being or help to mitigate any bias in terms of how we treat each other. The challenge was, because people were from different countries, there wasn't really a cultural understanding, and it was a really challenging for them to be able to partner best together. So did this whole assessment, went to the organization, spent some time with them, did the full assessment, and we recognized that they actually didn't have any policy in place or structure around communication. And organizational leadership also didn't have much accountability, and there wasn't much accountability at all around what does the right behavior look like when you're speaking to people of different backgrounds and different cultures. They didn't have things in place around how do we actually look at the data that we have. They weren't aware too much of the makeup of their organization, and a lot of what they were doing, even in terms of the life cycle for HR and especially their external partners were coming and saying, well, we have a very diverse um, model that we have in our organization. It's very important to us. We see that you're doing some things, but like, what is your actual company's significance, importance, commitment to DEI? Do you have a statement that you use? What are you doing differently? And in HR, when they're recruiting people, it was the practice for recruiting. They were not having um, their processes were not equitable in terms of looking across resumes, interviewing, things of that nature. So we went in, I did the whole assessment, we picked out their priorities, and it turns out we had to go back, do organizational leadership, accountability. We then went and we built out a structure where we said we're going to make policies and processes that will be helpful for how do you mitigate bias? How do you then, what's the process you're going to do? If you feel like you're discriminated against, you feel like someone else is not being treated fairly, what are you going to do? And how do you actually make that more proactive? And building a dashboard of data to really help them look across all of their demographics to say, are we meeting people where they are equitably? And after all this work, there was a lot more that went into this. I'm just kind of summarizing for the sake of time, but they shared the value of DEI. They had a DEI statement, and as a result of this, they had cost savings. Um, and not only did they have a significant cost savings, but they saw a 25% increase in retention, especially from historically marginalized employees. And the biggest feedback that I got when I finished doing this assessment and consulting work and talking with them and doing all this beautiful work that I thought was a lot of fun, actually. They were a really great group to work with. Um, the feedback that I got was this was super helpful and getting very clear on where we need to start, how we can build out a strategy. And from this, some companies will do a 1 year strategy, some will do a 2 year strategy, some will do a short term. We did a 3 year strategy for how we can build the organization up, get more people to feel that they belong. And the 25% increase in retention was especially a huge shift, because I started to see from the data, when they were looking at turnover information, a lot of it was the people in different countries, and a lot of it was people that are people of color in the United States. And so that was a significant increase in retention for them. So I share this to say that this assessment, it works. And when you want to be able to focus on the right things, sometimes you just need help in being able to do so. This assessment will really break down where your organization is to help you find the areas you need to focus on, so you can just build a much more inclusive culture. Right. So I want to give time for Q&A. Again, this is going to be anonymous. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat if you're okay asking them publicly. But if you want to scan this QR code on your phone, there is a place for me to be able to actually answer questions anonymously. And so I can answer any questions that you might have, that are anonymous. And again, if you can put them in the comments as well. So I'll give you a second to do that. And then from here, what I also want to share is that we covered quite a bit today, but what was significant is we covered the importance of understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you understand that, helping to map out your DEI efforts, like your policies, your processes, your systems, so that you can have a clear view of where you are and set yourself up for success. And then assessing and documenting your processes as well, so that you have that on paper or on a computer, essentially, so you know where you are, and you can see how you can do things differently and improve in the processes. And then ways that you can then implement your findings to build that DEI strategy. Even if you have an existing strategy that you think is working, there may be things that you maybe haven't assessed, and maybe you need to go back and look at things, and maybe it might shift your strategy a little bit, to build a more inclusive culture. And so remember, this is really important. Maybe I dance like this. I won't say yes or no. But with intention and with practice, you can create an inclusive and equitable practice and culture across your organization. And so here, and I'm hoping that this loads, because it should load. Maybe if I go to the next slide. But I have a free bonus for those that attended today. I'm going to go back to that and see if it loads in a second. And if not, I will put it up there. But you can reach out to me via my email, which is courageously-inclusive-ldr@gmail.com. You can connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not on LinkedIn with me already. But hopefully, if I redo this, it'll pop up, because I want to give you access to the free bonus that I have. So give me a second while I work through this small technical difficulty. And if not, I'll do it another way. Here we go. Sweet. Okay, let's see if it works when I do full screen. All right, perfect. So I want to give you a free bonus. And I also want your feedback. I love feedback because it helps me to be better for you and give you valuable information that you can use to just be better, and it helps me be better. So scan this QR code. It's going to take you to a feedback survey, and the code that you're going to use when prompted is data. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring you to a link to schedule time with me, so that I can then help do a strategy call around an audit. And we can talk about where you are right now, and where I think there's opportunities, and how you can move forward in terms of auditing your processes if you haven't done so already. So scan this QR code, put in the code data, and that will then prompt you to answer some questions for how I did today. And then from there, once you have to kind of go through all those steps to then schedule time with me My calendar is going to be open for about 2 weeks, and from there I can discuss an auditing strategy with you, one on one, and we can go through any other questions that you have, anything you want to talk through about your strategy. Maybe if it's even some concerns that you might have as well. So my dog is now barking. I went through the whole thing without my dog barking one time. And now that we reached kind of close to the end, she barks. But yes, please scan this, give feedback. I want to thank each and every one of you that was patient with me going through this masterclass. I really hope that this is something that you consider leveraging. It has helped so many different organizations, regardless again of the size. I've worked with organizations that are 25 people up to 1,000, up to 10,000. So really it helps to just tailor things for you in a more succinct way. So I want to thank everyone again. Thank you so much. I don't see questions as of now. I'm looking in my private chat. No questions, which means maybe I just did a really amazing job. So um, thank you all again. I'll put this up as well. If you would like my email, there's my website. And if you'd like to join me on LinkedIn, it's Dronda Wallach on LinkedIn, even though my name is Dronda Wallach Spiller. I hope you have a great day. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And I am sure that I will hear from all of you very, very soon. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.